The Stridsvagn 103, Strv 103, also known as the S-tank, was a Swedish post-war main battle tank. The tank is known for its unconventional turretless tank design, but the guns remained aimed by means of tracks and elevating with the adjustment of the suspension of the tank hull. Armored fighting vehicles without a turret are more often classified as tank destroyers, but they are usually used for different purposes. The Strv 103 was designed and manufactured in Sweden. After the Second World War, Sweden was in dire need of modern tanks. Their current medium tank, the Strv M/42, was very outdated, as it was armed with a 75mm short-barreled gun. The Swedish military was certainly impressed by the French AMX-13 and considered purchasing it, but eventually they concluded that their armor was too weak to meet their needs, along with several other shortcomings pointed out by General Swedlund. The deal with France was broken and Sweden finally decided to buy the British Centurion, which offered much better protection against nuclear weapons and conventional weapons. However, the need for light tanks still remained. Designing a completely new tank would have taken too long, about 7 years, so the Swedes chose to reuse the wartime Strv M/42 chassis. The idea of improving the armament of the Strv M/42 was proposed earlier. In 1944, the design would have featured a new turret complete with a new gun and an automatic bullet filler. The turret was named Delat Torn, which means a separate turret, since the automatic bullet filling mechanism would have divided the turret into 2 separate compartments. The guns were placed far behind the turret to reduce the bulge of the barrel. A mock-up of the tower was built and tested in 1944 and then prototyped in 1945, but testing in 1946 proved that the design was flawed. The idea to overhaul the Strv M/42 to improve its performance was brought up again in 1953. To revive this old chassis, a new turret was needed in order to fit a more capable gun. Firstly, it was considered to put the turret of the recently studied AMX-13 onto the chassis, but this was not deemed possible as the turret ring was too small. Therefore, a completely new turret was designed. The gun of choice was the 7.5 cm Lvcon M/36, one of the most effective Swedish heavy anti-aircraft guns. Modified as a tank gun, it was capable of penetrating 260mm armor at an angle of 90 degrees at point blank. In early 1954, 2 prototypes were ordered by the Swedish military. One of the main reasons this project was ambitiously supported by the military was the fact that the new turret modification was cheaper than buying a foreign tank, because the old Strv M/42 turrets would later be used as fortification turrets. The new turret could not reuse any of the old parts. As the Strv M/42 was only available in small numbers and suffered reliability issues because of its Volvo engine, the double-engined Strv M/42 and TV variants were chosen to mount the new turret on. The new turret had a futuristic look, being heavily sloped on all sides. Crew conditions were certainly improved over the Strv M/42, with the roomier turret making operating the tank a lot more comfortable. In order to keep production simple, many of the Centurion's components were used, such as the turret traverse override, the sights, smoke dischargers, sextant and many more. The back of the turret was occupied by an industrial Volkswagen engine, providing power through an electric generator for ventilation and heating. The unique design of the turret, with a specialized gun mantlet, enabled the gun to depress up to an impressive -15 degrees. However, the armor protection was quite disappointing, only 20mm at best. The armor was kept modest in order not to add any additional stress on the already heavily overloaded suspension. Armament. The original recoil system for the gun had to be replaced, as it was far too big to be mounted in a turret. Besides replacing the old recoil system with a new one, the barrel was slightly cut down as well. A new balancing component for the gun, invented by engineer Sven Berge, who would design the Strv-103 later in his career, was also tested and proved to be satisfactory. New APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot, ammunition further improved the anti-armor capabilities of the gun. Armament. The original recoil system for the gun had to be replaced, as it was far too big to be mounted in a turret. Besides replacing the old recoil system with a new one, the barrel was slightly cut down as well. A new balancing component for the gun, invented by engineer Sven Berge, who would design the Strv-103 later in his career, was also tested and proved to be satisfactory. New APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot, ammunition further improved the anti-armor capabilities of the gun. Armament. The original recoil system for the gun had to be replaced, as it was far too big to be mounted in a turret. Besides replacing the old recoil system with a new one, the barrel was slightly cut down as well. A new balancing component for the gun, invented by engineer Sven Berge, who would design the Strv-103 later in his career, was also tested and proved to be satisfactory. New APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot, ammunition further improved the anti-armor capabilities of the gun. Changes to the driver's hatch were also made. The hatch received a double prism periscope, but the driver did have a harder time getting in and out of the tank. This was because the turret traverse blocked the hatch and prevented it from fully opening up. Plates were put, note, not welded, they were apparently attached to hinges, over the steering gear hatches in order to make the vehicle NBC-proof. Engine and other driving mechanics. The engines were replaced by the more powerful Scania Vabis 607 engines, which themselves were improved as well by replacing the carburetor with direct injection. They now delivered 340 horsepower as opposed to the 325 horsepower on the original Strv-M/42. This also resulted in much lower fuel consumption and allowed the engines to function properly at temperatures as low as -25 degrees C. Radio equipment. The radio equipment consisted of 3 independent radios, one for internal communication, one for communication within the battalion and one to communicate with the infantry. Just like most German wartime vehicles, a laryngophone, throat microphone, was used for local communication. Radio equipment. The radio equipment consisted of 3 independent radios, one for internal communication, one for communication within the battalion and one to communicate with the infantry. Just like most German wartime vehicles, a laryngophone, throat microphone, was used for local communication. Tests were conducted with 3 different caliber weapons in order to measure the effectiveness of the turret armor. Firstly, a 20mm Tubkanon, a smaller caliber gun inserted into a larger caliber one, usually used during practice in order to reduce costs, was fired, using 20mm SLPPJR-M/42 rounds. It proved unable to penetrate the turret front, however, the sides were consistently penetrated from a distance of less than 300 m. Secondly, a Bofors 37mm PKON M/34 anti-tank gun was fired, using 37mm SLPPJR-M/49 rounds. It was able to penetrate the armor at all sides at a distance of less than 750 m. Lastly, the 75mm gun of another Strv-74 was fired, using 75mm SLPPJR-M/49 rounds. It was able to penetrate the turret mantlet from a distance of 1,400 m and cause significant damage to the interior. Its effective distance could quite possibly be more, but this was not tested. Production. After the design was completed, the production of the 2 prototypes could begin. The first prototype had a wooden mock-up turret, roughly presenting how the Strv-74 would look like. The same ammunition as on the PVK-VM/43 was used, which made production even cheaper.